I had a really great, unexpectedly, really great experience at Tustin High School. At the time, they had one of the largest African American student populations in Orange County because of the base that was located here. So there's a lot of black families, but just a lot of families of color, which made the school very just diverse, and it was a different experience than I had kind of growing up, normally being one of the very few, in school or in class. So that was a really good experience. And I did everything. I was a cheerleader. I was senior class president and homecoming queen, and then I went on to get involved in a program that sent me to Ghana, Africa, my senior year of high school. And then that experience kind of led me to want to go to a historically black college. So I went to Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans. And I mention a lot of that because I studied political science and public administration. And then once I graduated, I started working for the city of New Orleans. And I was just very low on the totem pole and got coffee and donuts. And about a year into my position, Hurricane Katrina hit the city, and I was a California girl that just didn't know much about hurricanes, and so I was like, well, I can stay and help out. And in the midst of that, hi there, lost everything: my car, all my clothes, all my belongings, anything I ever owned. Lost it at that time. But what I realized very quickly at the age of 21, 22 was uh, local government has a huge impact on uh, just serving the public. And where I used to think, you know, we were low on the totem pole as being city council and helping out the mayor, I thought the big positions are in the state, the governor, of course, the president. But I realized there's the highest office to me now is at the local level because it's where the rubber meets the road. It's where people see an impact right away. So that experience of going through Hurricane Katrina made me eventually want to serve and run for office, which is, fast forward, 10 years is what led me to come back home to California and eventually decide to run for office. So that's a lot of what, kind of spurs my service. But Orange County, my family's not new here. My grandparents came to OC when they were in their 20s, and that was in the 50s, and there weren't a lot of black families allowed to live everywhere. They were allowed to live on this one street, Ocean Boulevard in Laguna Beach, California, and they thought it was paradise on earth. And my dad was born here. He was the first African American baby born at Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach, and so our family goes way back here. So when I decided to run, I was concerned about a lot of things, and I was told that it would be very hard for me to get elected because there hadn't been, a huge history of black folks running for office in Orange County. On top of that, I was a Democrat. On top of that, at the time I was a single mom, and so I was just concerned about how people would accept me. But once I started knocking on doors and folks asked me, what my political affiliation was, the first thing I told them was, besides worrying about whether I'm a Democrat or a Republican, I told them, well, I'm a tiller first. And so associated with Tustin High School. And all of a sudden, those doors started opening a little bit wider. And I realized it's so important to, connect with folks about something that's personal to them, and that despite our political affiliations, many of us have a lot of things in common. And if we kind of just get to the core of it, we believe in safe neighborhoods and clean streets and good schools and a strong business community and all those foundational things. We can find that we have so much more in common than not. And so I kind of just try to start there whenever reaching out to the community, and then we can get into more complex issues. But if we start there, we realize we have a lot more in common than we do our differences. Um, but in 2021, as the mayor, when a lot was going on, COVID, uh, it was the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, and there's just a lot going on. I felt actually really prepared to lead at that time because of what I went through during Hurricane Katrina, and so I wasn't scared to make statements and make bold decisions and be very, open and present and visible during that time because of what I went through in New Orleans. So uh, after that experience, there was a lot of attention, I think, on the city. We wrote a resolution about embracing just peaceful protesting in the city, and that kind of led to uh, almost every city in the county passing a similar resolution. And they took the wording that we passed here in Tustin. So I felt really good about that, and it led to other opportunities to be, somewhat leaders in the county during that time. But I realized that as an African American female mayor during that time, there were a lot of eyes on me, and I realized that younger generations, they weren't necessarily seeing that a lot, particularly in Orange County. So it led me to write my first book, which was a children's book called "Mommy is the Mayor," and it was all about just really kind of showing my kids, but other kids and families, what a mayor does, but using it as representation and just showing someone that looks like me being a leader of a city. So the book did really well. I think to date we've sold over 10,000 copies, and so it spun kind of out of control, at least beyond the borders of Tustin, and it made a big impact. So after that, I had a lot of questions from women and future moms, existing moms. A lot of women were wondering, how are you doing all of this with kids that you're trying to raise, and you have a full time job? Because at the time, the Tustin City Council wasn't paying anything. We just passed something where we're getting somewhat of a stipend, but I went almost 5 years. We got $0 to serve, and so it's a volunteer position in many ways. So they're like, how are you holding down a full time job and serving on the council and raising kids? And so I thought, I want my next publication or my next book to be for the moms and for the parents, to kind of help them understand my mindset that you can do both things, have a career and have a family. But if you kind of change the narrative and think about marrying the worlds rather than separating them. So I've learned so many lessons from my kids that have actually helped me be a better professional, or uh deal with the stresses of even political life a little bit better, just learning lessons from them. So that's what I share in the book. It's 25 lessons that I've learned from my kiddos. And so I have twins now that are 15. And while I was mayor, what I didn't say earlier was, not only were we going through COVID and everything, but uh, I was pregnant with my third child. So the whole time I was, just out to here. And it was kind of funny because a lot of folks didn't know, because I would say I did 100 meetings on Zoom. So it wasn't until I kind of went out and they're like, wait a minute, you're having a baby. So I had a baby and everything through all that time. And so he'll be 2 in August. And so there's a lot going on. It was a lot of balls to juggle, but did it and had a great experience. So yeah, the book is just kind of just taking the readers through all those lessons. And so I'll share a couple with you guys today, and then we can do a little Q&A. And then Alexa, will there be any Q&A from the streaming? Can people do anything in the comments? Will you see it maybe? Okay, let me know. Okay. Okay. Um so one of the lessons, and I start off really basic. Like, first lesson, we talk about basic instinct, and just um for anyone that is a mom or a parent or a caretaker, sometimes, well, I think particularly with women, we have what we call women's intuition, and sometimes we don't even understand how powerful that can be until you have to care for others. And what I've learned over the years is that I've always had it, but I didn't always know how to listen to it, or I didn't always know how to tap into it. And so once, I had a little more experience as a mom, I realized that mother's instinct, that women's intuition, is very powerful and very valuable. And so I've used that in my career as well, to just listen to myself, to trust my gut, to not be so influenced by a lot of outside voices, and particularly in politics. I mean, that can be really hard because there's information coming in from everywhere. Social media makes it really hard to trust yourself and listen to yourself, because there's just so much that can fluctuate and feel like you have to go in one way or another, particularly when you're trying to be responsive to donors and voters, etc. So me just trusting my gut and listening to myself with my kids has actually helped me to do that in my career, and I think it's made me more successful, you know for that. So I mentioned that in the book, and that's just lesson number one. There's another lesson that I talk about. I remember my kids going to the playground, and they meet a new friend, and but all of a sudden, there might be a fight on the playground or something in terms of wanting to more swing time or more slide time, and or my kids would have a little argument with a kid at school, but the next day they'd be friends again. And I just remember thinking, well, how come we can't have that short memory, in our careers? We hold grudges at work, and we hold grudges with people, and they just continue on. And when I was running for office the first time, I had some friends that owned a local shop here, kind of similar to something like this, a small business, and they offered to do my first fundraiser. And 2 days before we were supposed to do the kickoff fundraiser, they told me that they couldn't host it for me anymore because they were nervous about what my opponents, might say, or what the I don't know, the consequence would be of supporting me. And I remember being so heartbroken and just thinking, oh, this is just going to set the tone for the rest of my campaign. But I was able to find another location. And I just thought to myself, what will I do when I have to see them again, in Target or at Starbucks, and I see them out in the community, and or what if I win, and then they've kind of, I don't know, not betrayed me, but they let me down in this moment. How will I act in that moment? Will I hold the grudge? Which I have a lot of political friends that, once you cross them, you're just dead to them, and they won't help you with anything or support you. And so I just thought about my kids and their short memory and how they were able to move on very quickly. And I said, you know what, I'm going to have a short memory, and that has served me well in politics to, you know, not let people mistreat me, but to not hold on to grudges, to remember what the the point is and what the goal is. And for me, the goal is to serve others. So having a grudge with every single person that, maybe hasn't lived up to my expectations just wouldn't serve me well. And so I've found that I've found a lot of success in growing coalitions and growing supporters by just having a short memory and moving on very quickly. I can think about even my colleagues on the dais. We disagree a lot on many issues, but if I were to harbor that, I may never get things done on behalf of the community, which is the point. And I've seen some local electeds that just can't get past the vote, and they wind up not being very effective um, because they take everything so personally and can't really move on. So uh, that's just an example of some of the very basic things I've learned from being a parent and being a mom that have helped me grow and excel in my career. And the overall message is to let women in particular know that you can succeed in your career and you can have a family. I'm not professing that it will be easy. I'm not professing that I have all of the tricks to the trade, but that it is possible. And there are a few things along the way if you really kind of hone in and tune into what you're learning from your kids, what you're learning as a mom or caretaker, that you can translate very easily. And so I think it works well. And so future moms and veteran moms have all kind of uh, seen the similarities, and they can relate to the lessons in the book. So my hope is that I can take the book on conferences and do workshops and things like that, but it has seemed to be a good complement to the Mommy is the Mayor book that's more for kids and families, and then kind of transitioning to supporting moms, but women in leadership and just encouraging more of it so that it's not so much of an anomaly and people aren't surprised when they learn about, a female mayor or a woman of color in leadership, but that it can be more pervasive because a book like this exists just encouraging and cheering women to continue to do it. I think when became mayor in 2021, it was almost 20 years since the last female mayor in Tustin. So we can't have that happen again. I just, I'm really hoping that we can, in some ways, even through this book, even when I do small talks like this, is to inspire and encourage women to take on the challenge. And they say there's studies that show that women have to be asked 7 times before considering running for office. So just knowing that the nudge has to be really strong. I want to do my part in creating more nudges and more encouragement, and hopefully inspiring women that they can do both. And with more of us in leadership, we can change the dynamics of what it feels like to lead, what that experience is like, and maybe make it a little more conducive to how we operate and how we run our families or whatnot, or whatever other demands we have in our life that make it a little easier for us to be at the table and to continue to be at the table. So hopefully you guys can purchase the book if you're interested. Arvida has both books, this book and Mommy is the Mayor, in stock. So, but happy to answer any questions, and we can talk about whatever. It doesn't have to be the book. It can be about politics. I know we said we get into some things. Yes. Well, I can hear you, but the online community might want to hear.
There we go. My wife talked about my food. Did she happen to mention what she did for a living?
She did not.
She
All about.
she didn't tell you that she was a city attorney.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I was.
Uh-huh.
I'm not right now.
For which cities?
We did Inland Empire. I worked with Seal Beach.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah,
So you're very well aware of
yes.
the juggle. Mm-hmm.
I was. Do you want to ask?
I just want to ask a real question. When you talk, I campaigned for another candidate twice. Katie Porter, you may have heard of her. And, and I was wondering if you two, like, from what you're saying, you're both like, she was a single mom. I don't know if and you both are dedicated to your families. Both are intellectual. Both looking at careers and both trying to change the face of Orange County. Um, you have another challenge in that, being African American in this day and age, is, as we just saw from the Supreme Court, has its challenges. So I'm wondering if you two ever commiserate and talk about the issues.
Yeah, we do. The last time number one, we find ways to encourage each other. And I remember talking to her one time about maybe even thinking about running for Congress one day, and I kind of mentioned something to her, in the realm of, well, I don't think I'm ready, or I don't think I can do the job. And she was just like, of course you can. Like, just of course you can do the job, and it'll just be your choice when you're ready. Because look at me, here I am. I'm managing a family. I had a full-time job, and I was able to move forward. But it has to be your decision, not anyone trying to just push you to do it. But if you're wondering if you're capable, of course you're capable. And so just hearing that from her was very helpful for me. And I realized, even though I'm in this realm of trying to inspire and empower and encourage other women, that I still have doubts myself and still have, just fears about doing bigger and more things, and how that will how my family might have to sacrifice because some of those decisions. So yeah, we often commiserate, and we also find some connection in feeling like being a mom is not our only, it's not all of our identity, that we have things we want to offer the community and the world, and that's also a part of us. And so we've talked about being able to be fulfilled and be impactful in that way makes us better moms. So the two don't necessarily pull from each other, but complement each other. And I think that's a message to other women too. When we feel like we have to be so sacrificial to give everything to our family, and then we deplete, from ourselves, that the message can be, no, if you pour into yourself, you're actually pouring into your family as well, because you're helping them um just be better humans in the world, so that they can see that leadership should be diverse. It should be it should look different than what we see on TV. When I was doing the readings with Mommy is the Mayor, I started kind of with kindergarten classes. I got invited to a lot of kindergarten classes. And so before I even opened the book, I would just ask the kids, does anyone know what a mayor does? And, all these hands would go up, which I was really surprised at. But girls and boys immediately would say, he does this and he does that, and just very unconsciously. And so it didn't even though the book, the cover was right there, and it didn't even click for them that they could say he or she, in any instance. It was very natural and very instinctual for them to say he, and it's just because of what what they have seen and what's been portrayed, in the media. So when we do things to fulfill our own desires and our own wants, then we're just better people for our kids. So her and I have talked about that often, and just try to present different opportunities for each other. Although I don't, she does that more for me than I do for her. She's had plenty of opportunities to do amazing things. So yeah, thank you for that question. That's great. Yeah.
Thank you. I had two questions. One is having worked in New Orleans during a really horrible time, I was curious if you found a lot more similarities than differences, even though we're here in Orange County and we have earthquakes, not floods or hurricanes. The second question is, do you find that being able to get along with people with differences is getting worse? And if not, or can you comment on that?
So in terms of the similarities and kind of like disaster preparedness, response, etc., I I have to say, without disparaging New Orleans too much, is that they really weren't prepared. They were not prepared for what was coming to the city. During Hurricane Katrina, that was the first time in the city's history they did a mandatory evacuation for the entire city. And so there was no transportation prepared, there weren't accommodations prepared, and then combining such a high level disaster, or even the potential of a high level disaster, they were very well versed in dealing with hurricanes, but kind of staying in place. And there were and then combining that with a somewhat impoverished city, high population minority city, there were people that lived in certain sections of the city that had never even crossed the bridge or never even went outside their neighborhood. Then we were asking people, you need to leave this city completely, maybe for the first time in their life, and you may not ever return, and you may not have enough money to feed yourself tomorrow, and now we're asking you to possibly be gone for weeks on end. And then when you return, you may not have a home to come back to. I found a lot of, and it was eye opening, because growing up here in Orange County, it was so different, and I learned a lot as a college student, but seeing it as a now a government employee, and what resources were available. And I just remember that the president, it was President Bush at the time, he didn't do a flyover for weeks. We didn't hear from him. I mean, we were on our own, and we had to figure a lot out. I think the thing that was most impactful to me about um, elected officials and government officials making provisions for a rainy day or for a future, making investments now for what wouldn't benefit them currently as electeds, but for the future, that really resonated with me, because what I was witnessing were a lot of elected officials making decisions that were going to make them look good at the time. And so they were diverting a lot of money to projects that felt and looked good, but there weren't a lot of investments in the levees. There weren't a lot of investments in things that, weren't shiny. You couldn't do a ribbon cutting for, you couldn't do a grand opening for, but infrastructure investments that needed to be made in the city, those were going unattended to, and monies that were purposed for that were being diverted into other things that kind of were quick fixes and were sellable and sexy. And so um, I learned a good lesson about how politicians, they have to make investments for the future, and they have to be committed to leaving a legacy that may never get credit for. And so I think you really do have to have some electeds with that mindset. But it's hard because then how do you get reelected if you don't have a lot to, brag about? So, but that was a really great lesson. And then about differences, people working together, even even starting my political career in the South, and I worked with Republicans and Democrats and a lot of very, very conservative Republicans. And, it's just even different down in the South. There was something about diplomacy that existed 20 years ago that we have lost now. And even when people didn't agree, they found a way to disagree, um, in some ways tactfully in person. And I saw a lot of Republicans and Democrats having drinks, after a session, going to each other's families events and things like that, even if they disagreed in public. There was something about being uh, diplomatic, and it was a compliment to be called a stateswoman or a statesman, to say, yeah, you can work with just about anyone. Now someone like me, a Democrat who I feel can be a little more moderate in times because I don't mind working with the other side of the aisle. I can get it's easy for me to be a target from my own party because of that, because I'm willing to, hear the other side. And so that it's tough. They don't make it easy for folks who are willing to um, you know, negotiate and compromise. And so I think those who are kind of uplifted, at least in their own party, are those who dig their heels in, who don't want to compromise and really stick to the script essentially on both sides, which only makes it more extreme on both sides. So yeah, what I knew coming into politics as a 20 something year old has changed drastically, and it's very hard to be diplomatic and be supported by one or the other party. And I think that's why you see even more electeds kind of going the independent route, because it's hard to serve the one master when it's so strenuous. They don't leave you a lot of leeway to compromise. So yeah, it's a lot different. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Book clubs questions that you want to relay back? Yeah, I would love to. Great question. So when I served, it was a rotating mayor position, and it was 1 year at a time. So it was very interesting. When I became mayor, it technically was my turn, but there have been instances in the city where it was someone's turn and they passed over someone, even though it was, should have been their turn. So my colleague, Becky Gomez, she had served on the council for 8 years prior to coming back on the council, and she never served as mayor because every time it was her turn, they kind of went over her. And you know about that as a city attorney. So I didn't take it for granted that when it was my turn, I got the votes from my colleagues to become mayor, but it was short lived, so it was only 1 year. The next year, we went to the voters to ask them if they wanted to have an elected mayor versus a selected mayor amongst the council, and the position passed, and so now we have an elected mayor. And the mayor that just ran, he when he won, that meant he has a 4 year term now. So he can serve up to two 4 year terms. So, but everyone after that, if they run, then and they win, they'll have a 4-year term. So it's good. It's good and bad. But we just have to ensure there's well, I think the mission is to have a diversity of candidates running for mayor. Otherwise, it's going to be very limited and then for a longer period of time in Tustin. So, good question. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Uh huh. Yeah. Mm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Sylvia. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up a really great question on the heels of seeing affirmative action dismantled, right? And um, I heard someone saying, the it's the affirmative part that's really what we're losing is people seeking out and then thus being required to seek out diversity so that where it's not naturally inclusive or where different people don't naturally come together, we're kind of willing different people to come together so that we all can benefit from diverse opinions and diverse backgrounds. And so then we're a better school population, better work environment because of that. So losing that, I think it sends a message that diversity doesn't come easy, that we have to be very purposeful in creating inclusive environments that if we just leave it to ourselves, we will be segregated because people will just go uh to places and and collaborate and build friendships and partnerships with people that look like them. That's natural, but we have to sometimes have laws and other requirements that kind of get us out of our comfort zone and our natural way of doing things. So with the dismantle of that, I think the question is, how can we as communities, local officials, and still figure out a way to affirmatively encourage inclusivity and diversity and to champion it? And if it's not required by law, how can we say that it's just valuable and important? So we're going to try to make sure that everywhere we wherever we can create diversity, that's what we're going to do. And so I think it's more about will and then mission of organizations and school districts, et cetera. And then it's about action. And I think this is actually an opportunity for local officials, local school districts. If we're not required by, well, and California is an exception, but if we're not required by law, what can we do to champion these certain things and to change the dynamic that we currently see? I have the 15-year-old twins. One goes to Tustin High School and one goes to Beckman High School. And there are differences, huge differences there. As a parent, I'm like, oh, I see some differences. And my son wanted to he's been going to the Tustin High School basketball camp since he was 7 years old. And when it was time for him to choose which high school to go to, he wanted to play for Coach Bossemeyer that's at Tustin High School. And there was no getting around that. And my daughter wanted to participate in the early college program. and Beckman has a more robust program. So they're at two different high schools, but they are experiencing high school very differently. The populations are very different. And so here we are in the same city and it's different. So it doesn't even cross cities necessarily, but yeah, I think there are opportunities here in Tustin just to ensure a little more diversity at Tustin High School now, and the same at Foothill and Beckman. But what can we do as leaders to champion that? And I think just show value over and over again of when we do that, our kids are better for it, our community is better for it. But it's to me, it's one of those things that it's on the long list of things we have to do, and sometimes it just you know falls to yeah, for sure, yeah. But if we had a couple people that's all that they were talking about and all that they were working for, I think we could see some differences. But I think it's going to have to be a grassroots um, movement now to just see regular community members saying, I think diversity is important and it's valuable, and I want to see my leaders, doing something about it rather than it coming from the federal government and telling us what we're supposed to be doing. Mm, good. Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And I can tell you just from my experience as a council member, and I have folks that are very apathetic often. And they say, well, I'm not going to come to a council meeting because my voice won't matter. And I try to tell them, for at least for me, I never make a decision before going into a council meeting. My mind is not completely made up, even though I read my 1,000-page agenda every couple weeks. And, I know about the issue, but I wait to hear from the public. And whether that's in person or Zoom or in written email, I wait to read those comments and hear the comments until I make up my decision. And sometimes I'll reserve even talking about the issue until I've heard from the public. But a lot of us are like that, and so sometimes it only takes one or two very convincing public comments and someone can change their mind. So to your point, it may feel like it's a drop in the bucket, but you keep doing that and then other people join you, it can make a difference. And by you doing that, they can't say no one is checking out the books, right? They they can at least say one person continues to check out the books in this genre. So I think that's uh, it's a huge way to make an impact, and it doesn't you know cause you to change your life too much to be able to do that. But I think that's a great form of activism. Yep, very good. Yes. Yeah.
As far as affirmative action, I actually read that the Supreme Court actually made an exception for military schools and military academies in the U.S. Yeah, and yeah, that's surprising, right? I didn't know that, and a lot of people don't know this. So that to me shows a lot of inconsistency and hypocrisy from the Supreme Court because it sends a message that hey, you want an education, then be willing to go bomb poor people in the global south, and that's how you'll get an education. So there's that on the one hand, and then but reading up on like the different sides, it's like kind of confusing to me how affirmative action was beneficial and also why the Supreme Court, like what was the reasoning they used to strike it down, especially considering they made that exception. Because some people say it was actually white women who benefited the most from it, anyways. So, because it's not just based on race, but also on gender and all the other stuff. So, like, what's the reasoning behind like affirmative action actually being created, and what was their I guess Supreme Court's legal reasoning. I mean, they claim it's unconstitutional, but why, right? Like,
You bring up a really good point, and we were just talking about just knowing your history, right? So even thinking, well, helping our this generation understand why affirmative action was enlisted in the first place, but then some data about who benefited the most. I think a lot of people wouldn't know that. And so, I think we're just doing ourselves a huge disservice overall by picking and choosing what we talk about in history, and not giving a holistic picture to our kids. And so, it's a hard job. Even when I think about my kids, what they know and what they've been exposed to, and I can't really rely on the schools to teach them a lot about Black history. So it's a heavy weight on me and my husband to teach them a lot about what we want them to know, and then just trying to ensure that they have an interest in it. But it goes even farther beyond just Black history. So I mean, you make a good point that we just don't know our history, and so we're just kind of watching the sound bites. I'm In my day job, I'm the chief communications officer for the district who has Irvine Valley College and Saddleback College. And I always say in marketing, you need to see something 7 times in order to remember it. And then adults have an attention span of, that's shorter than a goldfish. So it's like, think about the news and politics. We can't even pay attention long enough to know any history. So it's a real challenge to uh, give people context and give them history of why decisions are being made, enough so that they can pay attention to when things seem to be shifting and changing and how that could impact them. So, I don't know if I could just answer your question, but you just make a really good point. And history is important, and we just have to involve it in everything. And it looks like I have 5 minutes before we have to end. They're giving me the sign. Yeah. No. Mm. Smart.
She's a black artist, and her instrument of choice is the banjo. And this is someone who's trained in classical
Right.
voice, classical violin, and I thought about it when you said history,
Yeah.
because I was listening to a podcast of hers yesterday, and she was talking about the history of the banjo, and that it started as a West Indian African instrument, and then it migrated to the hill country of North America, where it became intertwined between both blacks and whites
Hmm.
in its early days. And now when people think banjo,
Oh yeah,
very few people think of black banjoists. And yet
for sure.
it is
Yeah.
a black instrument. So, it's just, you can take little things, and
Yep.
that's what Rihanna does. She takes something that's little and is able to translate it in a way that it shows growth and distribution. It's very cool how it all works together.
Well, right. That's what history does, is it shows our connection. And so how can you really, hate someone that now you know a little bit more about how, their history connects us, and maybe you love the banjo, but you didn't know it came from, West African tradition or whatnot. And so that just it allows you, or should allow you, to appreciate, other cultures that much more, and find that we're all intertwined in some way. Um I think that's the beauty of learning our history. So yeah, but it sounds like you all are pushing the needle where it needs to be pushed, and I can't thank you enough for just finding enough interest to come today and just having a nice dialogue. But thank you for the support, and hope to see you all out and about, and keep reading. It's gonna unlock some activism and freedom, I think, in the future if you just keep doing that. So thank you. Thanks, Alexa. Okay, thank you.